2:55. 5 more minutes to go, I thought, as I glanced once again at the clock on the wall. It was Friday. I was in my last period of the day, world geography, taught by the closest thing to a witch I'd ever met, a fat, ugly old hag who loves to torment us by giving us bad grades on the most spurious of grounds. To my left was Courtney Bitts, a blonde sophomore, who's a good friend of mine. To my right was the other Courtney Coffee, a freshman freshwoman who was the tallest girl in the school. And across from me, smirking like a mad monkey, was John Hollins, my best bud, who nonetheless always gets a kick out of needling me. I'm a freshman too. My teachers all think that I'm smarter than most of the seniors, though. Other than my advanced intellect, I'm pretty average. I shot another glimpse at the clock. 2:57. The last period on Friday is always the longest time of the week. Have you ever noticed that? I was sitting there, trying not to fall asleep as the teacher droned on and on and on, and on about the problems Russia and the Eurasian republics have been facing ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the racial backgrounds of the Caucasians, and the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl, and a bunch of other useless facts that adults never use but say that we'll need someday. 2:59. Come on, clock, spare me. This madness must end. I don't know why the principal insists that the teachers keep right on doing their thing up until the bell actually rings. He's got a German background, I'm told. Maybe his father was a Nazi. That would explain a hell of a lot. I mean, maybe playing Game Boy in class isn't the best diversion to use during a lecture, but I think that 2 weeks of detention is a little unreasonable, don't you? 3 o'clock. Finally! I scooped up my backpack and bolted, not even bothering to gather up the doodle I'd been working on for the past half hour. After a short stop by my locker to grab the materials I'd need to write the paper due Monday, which would no doubt be completed approximately 9 seconds before the teacher came around to collect it, I was out of there, and not a moment too soon. The human river that came bursting out of the school's single pair of doors, who came up with that bright idea, swallowed me up almost before I could yell, "Stampede!" I paused only slightly to glance at the small group of cheerleaders who were heading to their last practice before the big game tonight. The cheerleaders, as cliques go, were not as powerful here as the clichés would suggest. That is to say, they weren't the centers of attention that they seem to be in other schools, and because of the small attendance of this school, they weren't too numerous. Because of this, they weren't as spitefully arrogant as they were reputed to be. In fact, they were rather nice. Most of the guys in my grade don't really like the cheerleaders at our school, but I did. I raced home as fast as I could. I grabbed my usual snack of combos and a cup of Dr. Pepper, and hustled into the den, where my video games were. I picked up my N64 controller and immediately started up again on my newly acquired The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask video game. After about an hour of gaming, my snacks were gone and I was stuck in a particular area. I decided to watch a little TV before getting some dinner and going to the game. Small-town high school football games are, in our town at least, the social events of the school year, topped only by the prom and homecoming dance. Virtually everyone in town attends, because virtually everyone in town is related in some form or another to one of the people involved. The home games are really bad, because the bleachers are usually packed and the concession stands need their own parking lot. I'm joking, but not by much. I sought out one of my friends, Tommy Johnson, a couple minutes before the game started. Tommy's about average height, but he's blocky and well-built and he's on the JV team. I didn't have any classes with Tommy that semester, but we were still good friends. He was involved in an argument with his dad about the NFL at the moment, so I just said hi and leaned against the rail to wait for the game's beginning. We lost the flip and had to kick off. The band did a drum roll while the kicker ran towards the ball. The ball went flying in a graceful arc, an opposing player caught it, and ran straight to the end zone with almost no interference from the home team. Several fathers started cussing. I love the subtleties of high school football, don't you? At halftime, Tommy, I, and a couple of our friends met up with Tommy's girlfriend, Megan, and the rest of the JV cheerleading squad after they got off from selling bulletins. Megan is this really short girl. We're talking less than 5 feet here with blonde hair and beautiful blue eyes. She's got a relatively good figure. If she were full size, I'd guess that she'd have a D cup, and she's really sweet. I've secretly had a crush on her for years, but the day I admit that is the day they open a popsicle stand in hell. When third quarter started up, the visitors immediately ran in for another touchdown, but there was nothing new about that. Our team sucks. I'm told that last season, they had more losses than points. I was getting kind of bored with watching the football team get run into the ground, so I turned my head and looked at the varsity cheerleaders instead. One of them in particular, a Jennifer Donald, really caught my eye. She was the captain of the cheerleading squad, and she was stunningly beautiful. She was a brunette with icy blue eyes and this luscious figure, with a flat, trim stomach, a tiny, sculptured waist, and wide, flowing hips. Her breasts were medium-sized D cups, firm and full. I was admiring her when it happened. I felt the wave hit me. It was as if suddenly everything froze for a second, and I felt a sudden jerking throughout my entire being, almost as if I were caught in some kind of explosion. It hit me so suddenly, I didn't know what happened, only that I felt this horrible wrenching. Then I blanked out. When I woke up, I could immediately feel that something was different. It was nothing I could specifically put my finger on, it was just that everything felt wrong. Then I looked at myself. 2 large, round mounds pressed out of my chest. I was a girl. I stood up, noting in passing how much smaller I was, and looked around. I was standing in front of the bleachers. A row of cheerleaders lay collapsed by my side. I counted them out and found that one was missing. I began to get a sinking feeling that I was that one. Thoroughly depressed now, I began to mentally tag the remaining cheerleaders, noticing absently that people were beginning to wake up. When I had finished naming the cheerleaders on the ground, I knew that I had the body of the very cheerleader I had been admiring earlier. It always seems to work out that way, doesn't it? Picture this situation. You're at a football game, ignoring the home team getting stomped, and admiring the perfect attributes of the head cheerleader, just like you always do. Then, boom, you black out, and when you wake up, you have those attributes. It's the kind of thing that tends to dishearten you. I was snapped back to reality by the sound of screaming. Coming from various places on the football field, people were waking up, noticing their unusual circumstances, and bawling like babies as if that would fix things. Mankind's first reaction to any disheartening situation is to scream about it. This seems, to me, to indicate that our society has becoming disgustingly infantile. It's my personal opinion that when stuff like the cataclysmic swapping of the bodies of just about all the people in the world happens, you should start looking for answers instead of sitting around and crying about it. A short Hispanic cheerleader with boobs even bigger than the ones I now had woke up and groggily looked at her hand, and then at me. Inevitably, she started screaming, before getting up and running over to where I was standing. "Give me back my body," she sobbed. "I didn't take your body," I said harshly, roughly pushing her away. I looked around, noticing my mahogany hair shift positions. Jennifer wore her hair short, but it was still longer than I was used to. I think this happened to everyone. I'm Catalina Richards now, she shrieked. And don't you want to find out why? Over time, I've found that a bit of asperity is the best cure for hysterics. She calmed down and looked at me with confusion. What happened? She asked, wiping tears from her eyes. I think that everybody in the football field, or maybe even more wide-ranging than that, swapped bodies, I speculated. I'm guessing everyone will go home, try to reunite with their families. My guess appeared to be correct. The announcer or whoever was in his body instructed everyone present to go home and try to find their families while they meaning the government, I assumed, attempted to find the cause of the swaps. Incidentally, I'm told that since we were behind when the game was called, the victory went to the visitors. Some people are total fanatics. As I headed to the exit, Jennifer stopped me. Who did you used to be? She asked. Eric Wright, I muttered. I went home on foot. The football field is a good mile away from my home, and half of that is uphill. Strangely, or maybe not so strangely though, I didn't feel exhausted when I got there. Probably because my new body was in better shape than my old one. At my home, I found that except for me, my family was more or less unchanged. My mother had been swapped with a woman who appeared to be about the same age as her, maybe a few years younger. My sister had been reciprocated with one of her friends, and my father, much to my surprise, was unchanged. I immediately began to revise my theory. Allison teased me about my unexpected gender change until Mom told her shortly to shut up so we could hear the emergency newscast. We were told the facts, or what the government thought were the facts. There had been an explosion somewhere in the southwest United States that had caused some type of energy to encircle the globe within minutes, swapping around about 93% of the world's population. I did some quick math. That's about 13 out of every 14 people, I pointed out. 13? Mom asked with a raised eyebrow. Roughly, I said, shrugging my newly slender shoulders. You probably already know about all of this unless you've been living on the moon. The chaos caused by the Great Shift people were already calling it that was enormous, of course. As well as the to-be-expected identity confusion, there were also car accidents where children or infants had been shifted into the bodies of drivers, airplane crashes where passengers had been shifted into the bodies of pilots, and the total collapse of the jailing system. Some of the worst incidents were when doctors got swapped out of their bodies during surgery or something, leaving behind someone with no clue what they were doing. We were released from school, of course. I went upstairs, feigning exhaustion. Though it was quite late and I was quite tired, my bed wasn't the main reason I wanted to be alone. I went into my room and locked the door. Then I began taking off my clothes. When I stripped out of Jennifer's cheerleading uniform, I saw that I was wearing silky black panties and a black bra that restrained my new breasts. After only a moment's hesitation, I removed the bra as well. My breasts were large, but not enormous. Even so, since I'd never had any before, they seemed sort of huge to me. They were soft and spongy, yet firm. Because of their large size, their inner sides pressed warmly against each other, giving me shuddered cleavage. Their great weight pulling against my chest and shoulders felt so weird that I couldn't imagine ever getting used to them. My nipples, formerly virtually non-existent, were now much larger, about the size of $quarter. They erected immediately when I touched them with an exploratory finger, sending strange feelings rippling through my brain as my boobs jiggled wildly in reaction. I hefted my mammaries and sighed. My supple breasts overflowed my small, girlish hands with a smothering, yielding softness that mercilessly showed me just how female I had become. Almost totally naked, I sighed again as I beheld the body I would probably own for the rest of my life. My body was completely hairless, save for the well-trimmed bush that surrounded my nether regions. Mine was girl's flesh, baby-like in its softness and smoothness. I now possessed the voluptuous curves of the young woman. I could even feel that I was smaller and lighter than before, now 5'6" and a mere 112 pounds. I tried to put the bra back on, but gave up after several minutes. Truly exhausted now, I turned off the light and allowed myself to fall backwards onto my bed, gathering the covers around me as I closed my eyes. The last coherent thought I had before drowsing off was amazement about how large my bed seemed now. When I woke up the next morning, I saw that there was someone standing over me. It was Jennifer, dressed in clothes that looked a bit too big for her, eyeing me impatiently. "You finally woke up," she said tartly. At some time or another during the night, I had pushed the covers down below my new breasts, exposing them painfully obviously. I blushed furiously and instinctively tried to draw the covers around me and restore some shred of my modesty. "Eric," she said in a long-suffering tone, 24 hours ago I owned that body, and I've had it all my life. Don't worry, you're not showing me anything I haven't seen before." I knew she was right, now that I'd had time to think about it, so I relaxed a bit. I did not, however, push the covers down further again. "What time is it?" "About 10 in the morning," she said, walking over to the windows and opening the blinds. "What do you want?" "I remembered that you were wearing my cheerleading uniform when you left last night. I thought you might want some more casual clothes." She picked up a bag and tossed it to me. Inside were a fresh bra and panties, a tight blue t-shirt, and a tight pair of denim jeans. Comfortable and not too revealing, but not prudish. I put on the clothes with a little help from Jennifer in putting on the bra. "What's it like out there?" I asked curiously as I got dressed. Her eyes grew haunted. "Total chaos," she said quietly in the tone of someone trying to block out something from their mind. "Murders, suicides, accidents. Looting. And rape. There are fires everywhere, but no one seems to be able to put them out, so it just keeps spreading. Lots of people are confused and depressed. People are stabbing themselves in broad daylight. It's terrible." Despite all this, though, the world recovered in a surprisingly short period of time. Someone extremely practical suggested lie detector tests to get rid of all the famous people impersonators, and the governments of the world had the swaps of their citizens pretty much mapped out in about 7 months. I'm not saying that there wasn't any fraud, but most of the important people had been figured out. As it turned out, despite the 8 or 10 people claiming to be the President of the United States, he hadn't really been swapped at all. He was one of the 7% of unaffected people. Isn't that funny? We were sent back to school about 2 months after the Great Shift. Isn't that pathetic? You know something's wrong with the education system when the students receive less time off due to the most catastrophic disaster in the history of mankind than they do for summer vacation. The first day of school after the Great Shift was extremely weird, not to mention awkward for most of the people involved. Kids would walk into the room and we'd ask them if they were a student or the teacher. The principal had gotten swapped into the body of his 13-year-old granddaughter, and that made him a little less imposing. I was often surprised about who sat where and not a few times about the irony of the bodies some people had received. I think I've even got a house cat in one of my classes. Have you ever seen a cat attempt to wield a pencil? It's a hysterical experience, but to our credit not one person laughed. Quite a few classes were turned into study hall because said classes needed to be reworked due to some things that some swapped people weren't exactly prepared to deal with. Physical education, for instance, was dropped temporarily because half the people, myself included, didn't know which locker room would be most suitable. Most of the material English, math, and foreign languages remained intact. But some of it, like science and world religions, had to be heavily rebuilt as a result of the many theories the Great Shift had rebutted and the many new religions that had sprung up because of it. Sex ed, health, and physical education had to be virtually dismantled and rebuilt due to all the problems caused by gender and age swapping. They eventually worked something out, though, and now they have separate classes for people who have had their gender changed. There are about 10 people in my boys-turned-girls sex ed class, and we're all close friends. That happens when unique people get together, I've noticed. Despite all the instances of people having their genders swapped all around the world, I doubt that there are more than 20 gender-changed people in the whole town. One of whom is Tommy, who did a one-for-one swap with his girlfriend, Megan. It seems that you had a much greater chance of switching with someone if you were touching him or her at the time of the shift. I'm told Tommy and Megan were making out behind the bleachers during the shift, so that really nailed down the lid on their coffins. The old Jennifer and I are friends now, too. She was nice enough to give her entire wardrobe to me after the swap. I stayed as close as I could to her the first couple of days because I was very nervous about going out in public with her body. She also helped in getting me set up with my current boyfriend. There was a guy watching me for a couple of days. The original owner of his body was on the football team, I think. I didn't really want anything to do with him because I thought I would feel like a homosexual. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Anyway, Jennifer hinted none too subtly that he had the hots for me and that I should try to get hooked up with him. After I refused initially to even talk to him, she badgered me mercilessly about it for a few days until I finally gave in. As it turned out, though, the guy, Alan DeJuris, was a girl-turned-boy. He was originally Ellen DeJuris, an average girl who was no knockout, but not a skank either, sort of like I had been. After we got to know each other, we got along great, and our relationship even feels sort of natural. We've been dating ever since, and we went to the prom together earlier this year. There hasn't been any sex yet. I've insisted that we'll wait until if and when we get married, but there have been a few tender moments. I don't think I need to pursue that any further. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Just about everyone who underwent a gender change has changed his or her name to the more masculine or feminine version, without being totally absurd. I mean, we don't have any Edwinas or Johnnies or whatever. I'm now known as Erica. Tommy couldn't find a colloquial version of his name, so he decided that we should just call him Megan, after the body he now holds. The sports system ground to a halt, but the school board is going to reinstitute them all next year. In fact, cheerleader and football tryouts are this very afternoon. Both of those teams do most of their practicing during the summer, on the grounds that your body is all that counts. If you were the star quarterback for your team last year and you got shifted into the body of a 5-year-old girl, tough. If, on the other hand, you were a 90-pound weakling who got shifted into the body of that star quarterback, welcome aboard. As you would imagine, the former jocks that are unable to play are whining about it, and the people who can play are smirking it up. I'm told that a group of geeks who became 2 football players and a cheerleader are systematically seeking out and pounding everyone who ever beat them up, and that's quite a long list. What a shame, huh? Everyone's pretty much adapted. They didn't really have much of a choice, since the shift seemed to be irreversible. So now, though heavily changed, I'm back where I started. I'm sitting here in world geography class with only 5 minutes to go. A young, buxom blonde is lecturing us about Japan's economy, China's government, and the Korean War. A short Asian girl sits to my right, and directly in front of me is a leering 9-year-old boy making perverted jokes about my gender. John seems fully intent on playing that joke to the hilt. Courtney Bitts, one of the few unchanged people, still sits on my left. We've grown closer than ever since the great shift. I unconsciously cross my legs in a very feminine manner. I've changed a lot, but I'm still the same in some ways. I still play video games, though not with the enthusiasm I used to. I've still kept up with most of my other hobbies and am still on good terms with most of my old friends. However, I've also become more of a teenage girl. I can wear women's clothes, put on makeup, and flirt with men, though I don't usually do that. It's kind of embarrassing, and I'm already attached. I can still do it, though. Also, I get more of a kick out of doing things Jennifer used to do, which seems to indicate that our likes and dislikes are not totally dependent on the individual. I attend parties and dances, talk on the phone for hours, and get a lot of pleasure out of shopping, all of which I used to detest before. A couple of my friends from sex ed and I go to the nearest city for some serious shopping every few Saturdays, and I enjoy every minute of it. The bell rings and I'm out the door. I'm supposed to meet Megan and Jennifer at the gym.